Today's story is not about a tweet, a meme, or a slogan that disappears in 24 hours. It's about something far more basic, whether the people you trust with your life at 35, 0 feet, or quietly betting their own money on the companies they are supposed to police. If you've ever flown in bad weather and felt that small spike of anxiety as the plane shakes, part of what calms you is a simple assumption that somewhere in Washington, somebody serious is regulating this industry with both hands, not one hand on a rule book and the other on a stock portfolio. Donald Trump's choice to run the Federal Aviation Administration was Bryan Bedford, a man who spent years at the top of the airline world as CEO and chairman of Republic Airways. That kind of experience can be valuable. He knows exactly how airlines operate, how regional carriers cut costs, where the safety pressures and financial pressures collide. But that experience is also why ethics rules around his new job had to be strict. When the Senate considered his nomination, Bedford signed a formal ethics agreement. In plain language, he promised to sell off his airline holdings as soon as practicable, but not later than 90 days after my confirmation. No footnotes, no cute loopholes. 90 days to get out of the stocks that would clearly conflict with his new role. The reason for that requirement isn't theoretical. At the time of his nomination, Bedford's own financial disclosure showed that he held between $6 million and $30 million worth of restricted and unrestricted shares in Republic Airways, the regional airline he had just spent years running. That range is how the disclosure forms work. They don't show you the exact value, but even at the lowest point, we're talking about a position that would make him one of the most heavily invested individuals in that company. Then he took a job overseeing the entire U.S. aviation system, including regional carriers like Republic. That is the dictionary definition of a conflict of interest, unless you divest. That's why the 90-day clock existed at all. Here's what actually happened. On July 9, Bedford was confirmed as FAA administrator. The 90-day window was supposed to slam shut in early October. According to the Office of Government Ethics, that did not happen. On December 8, the Senate Commerce Committee received a letter from OG notifying them that Bedford had failed to comply with certain provisions of his ethics agreement regarding his holdings in Republic Airways Holdings, Inc. Translated out of bureaucratic language, he still held a significant equity stake in the airline months after the deadline, in direct violation of the agreement he signed to get the job. Senator Maria Cantwell, the Democratic chair of the Commerce Committee, responded the way a serious oversight chair is supposed to in her own letter to Bedford, dated December 9, and later released publicly. She quoted the ethics office and spelled out the problem. Based on this letter, it appears you continue to retain significant equity in this conflicting asset months past the deadline set to fully divest from Republic, which constitutes a clear violation of your ethics agreement, she wrote. This is unacceptable and demands a full accounting. She pointed out that more than 150 days had passed since his confirmation, far beyond the 90-day limit he had agreed to, and demanded details on exactly what he still owned and which decisions he had recused himself from while holding it. Now, if that were the whole story, it would already be bad. But there's another layer. OG's letter notes that Bedford didn't just fail to divest on time. He actually tried to change the deal in his favor after he was already in office. He approached ethics officials and sought to amend his agreement, asking for additional time to meet his obligations. The ethics office said no. A request like that is supposed to be granted only in narrow circumstances, and they didn't see a justification here. Even after that denial, the Senate was told he still had not fully sold his Republic stake by early December. If you or I tried that with a basic compliance deadline, it wouldn't be seen as a mix-up. It would be seen as defiance. While Bedford was missing his ethics clock, Republic Airways was doing deals. In April, Republic and Mesa Air Group announced a merger that would combine their regional fleets into a single carrier, operating around 310 Embraer jets with over 250 daily departures under the Republic Airways Holdings name on NASDAQ. Mesa shareholders would own up to 12% of the combined company. Republic shareholders about 88%. The company said the combined airline would support American, Delta, and United under various capacity purchase agreements, with projected revenues of around $1.9 billion and adjusted EBITDA north of $320 million. They pitched it as America's regional airline of choice with better capital structure and improved margins. Now remember, who one of those Republic shareholders is the man in charge of the FAA. According to Cantwell's letter, at the time of his nomination, he held between $6 and $30 million in Republic equity. The merger is designed to deliver value creation for both Mesa and Republic shareholders. to use the company's own words. And the FAA administrator overseeing the system those regional jets operate in, the rules for pilot training and rest, maintenance oversight, certification and safety enforcement, still hasn't fully exited his position in that airline. That isn't a random overlap. That's exactly the scenario ethics agreements are built to prevent. The FAA's public response has been cautious and lawyerly. A spokesperson has said Bedford is in the process of divesting and requested stock certificates from the Transportation Department to assist in that process. They say he intends to provide more information directly to Senator Cantwell, but none of that changes the timeline. His own pledge was as soon as practicable, but not later than 90 days. There is no clause in that sentence that says, unless you're busy, unless the price isn't where you'd like it, or unless you would prefer to wait until after a merger. If an ethics agreement is only as binding as the market conditions, it's not an ethics agreement, it's a suggestion. Here is where the broader pattern matters. In the same Washington ecosystem, investigators have flagged a senior Treasury official for failing to disclose crypto holdings tied to companies overseen by his office. A Commerce Undersecretary has come under review for not fully divesting from a defense supplier that benefited from tariff decisions. The Department of Transportation's own Inspector General has identified managing conflicts of interest and transparency in interactions with industry as one of the top management challenges for 2025. Each case on its own might be called a lapse. Together, they start to look like a business model, appoint people deeply tied into the industries they regulate, trust them to sign ethics agreements, then look the other way when they treat those agreements as flexible. When you look closely at Bedford's career, you see why this profile appealed to Trump. As head of Republic Airways, he was known for aggressive cost-cutting and negotiating tough deals with major carriers who subcontracted regional flying to his company. He stepped into the FAA promising to modernize air traffic control and improve efficiency in a system everyone agrees is outdated. For a president who likes CEOs and loves the idea of bringing privatized sector discipline into government, that sounded perfect. But there is always a risk when you move someone from the very top of an industry straight into the regulator's chair without a cooling off period. They may not fully take off the old hat. That's what the divestment requirement was supposed to enforce. Imagine you are running the FAA and you're reviewing safety directives that might force a regional airline to pull aircraft from service for inspections or to invest tens of millions in new systems. If you own nothing in the industry, your only question is, what's safe and legal? If you own 8 figures of stock in one of the companies that will bear those costs, a second question creeps in. What does this do to my position? Ethics rules are there precisely to remove that second question from your mind. When you ignore those rules, you are telling the system that you're willing to keep your capital on the line while you hold the pen. For passengers and pilots, this is not abstract. Every time something goes wrong in aviation, a near or miss on a runway, a mechanical issue that forces an emergency landing, a crew too exhausted to catch a mistake, the FAA's independence becomes a life and death question. Can you trust that enforcement decisions, fines, route approvals, and safety directives are being made with zero personal financial interest in the outcome? Or are they being made by someone who is also worried about how those decisions will play out on their brokerage account? The moment you learn the top regulator still holds a large stake in a carrier, you start to ask those questions and the trust starts to leak out. Politically, this goes directly to Trump's old slogan that he would drain the swamp. Draining a swamp would mean reducing conflicts, tightening ethics rules, making sure regulators are not doubling as investors in the industries they oversee. What we see instead is something closer to monetizing that swamp, putting people in positions of power who arrive with big holdings in the sector, letting them sign agreements, then looking away when they drag their feet on those promises. The FAA case is just more glaring because the agency is visible and the numbers are large. If this is how the system works at the top of aviation safety, you can guess how relaxed the culture might be in less visible corners of the government. Bedford still has a chance to come clean. He can release a full, detailed accounting, the exact number of shares he held at each point, the dates and prices of any sales, a list of every case where he formally recused himself from matters involving Republic or Mesa. He can show that he didn't use inside knowledge or regulatory power to enrich himself through the merger. And if he can't show that, or if the record reveals that he made or influenced decisions while still holding the stock, then the issue shifts from ethics violation to potential legal exposure. At that point, we're no longer talking about one man's failure to keep a promise. We're talking about whether the United States let a conflicted shareholder run its aviation watchdog with his own money directly on the line. For anyone investing in airlines, aerospace, or any heavily regulated sector, this is also a reminder of how political risk really works. It's not just about whether tariffs go up or down, or whether a president likes a particular company. It's about who is sitting in the regulator's chair, what they own, and how seriously they take the idea that public power and private capital shouldn't mix in the same hands. When that line blurs, you might get a short-term sugar high in one stock. Over the long term, you get a system that investors, passengers, and workers all trust a little bit less. And trust, once lost, is far more expensive than any ethics agreement.